Hello, this is David Lee from the Department of Energy. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to attend and listen to this webinar. AHAM approached DOE several months ago about a recycling program for refrigerators. And we've taken a hard look at this, and we think it is worth kind of exploring further with the evaluation community, which many of you comprise. We are really looking to your input here to help us put together a summary document of this presentation and people's reaction to it. So we did send out a questionnaire with the invitation, or with recently with information about the webinar. And at the end of this webinar, we would appreciate that if you could answer the questions on that questionnaire. And you will have 1 week to answer those questions. We will then take those questions and submit them to AHAM for a response, and take the response back, review that response, and then incorporate it into what eventually would be a summary of this webinar, its contents and the questions that were raised and the responses to those questions. So now I'd like to turn it over to Ed Barber, who will be moderating this webinar for us.
Great. Thanks, David. As David mentioned, I'm Ed Barber. I'm with Navigate Consulting, and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. Before we hand it over to AHAM for the presentation, I want to go over just a couple of ground rules and logistics. We are currently scheduled for an hour presentation. AHAM, as I indicated, they're hoping to make it through in 45 minutes, which should give us plenty of time for open discussion at the end, 30 to 45 minutes as well, which will be great. Lines will be muted during the presentation. But we do ask, if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to send them via the chat line in the webinar, and we will queue those up for the open discussion and be able to say this. Also, if you want to wait till the end, feel free to ask the question during the open discussion, but we will go through those questions queued up first before we get into anything that has not been sent in. At this moment, I'd actually like to just hand it over to Rob McCarver of AHAM, and we'll jump right into the information.
Great. Thank you, Ed. And I'd like to start by thanking David and his colleagues at DOE for organizing this webinar and for the positive working relationship we've had with DOE staff in preparing for today's presentation. For those of you who don't know AHAM, we're the trade association representing manufacturers of household appliances like refrigerators, dishwashers, washer dryers, etc. Our members are household names like GE, Whirlpool, Electrolux, Samsung, and LG. Our companies employ about 100,000 people in this country and produce more than 95% of household appliances shipped for sale in the United States. Our members are firmly committed to energy efficiency, and working closely with EPA and DOE, our industry has improved the energy efficiency of its products dramatically over the last 2 decades. It's this improvement, we believe, that makes possible the truly significant energy savings and GHG reductions that a refrigerator early replacement program could achieve, as we'll be discussing in today's webinar. What we intend to present today is a unique new concept for appliance rebate programs that links purchase and disposal rebates in a single transaction, thereby leveraging the gains from the enhanced energy efficiency of new products and ensuring that the existing demand from an older appliance is permanently removed from the grid. It's this combined change in performance that can drive significant gains in efficiency and related GHG reductions. As will be explained shortly, we're seeing a slow decline in the impact of current appliance rebate programs, but we're confident that this new linked concept will restore the vitality of these programs while simultaneously supporting other important policy objectives. By way of background, sorry, Steve, next slide, please. By way of background, the Clean Power Plan proposed last year by EPA underscored for AHAM the benefits of refrigerator early replacement and its potential value to policymakers and industry as we work together to raise the performance of energy efficiency programs. To assess the size of these benefits, we conducted an in-depth analysis of a prototype refrigerator replacement and recycling program. Today, we want to lay out the methodologies and data we used in this analysis and get your feedback. We also want to explore whether our approach could form the basis for a model early replacement program that could provide a foundation for expanded adoption of these programs under the Clean Power Plan or as part of other initiatives. If the concept of a model program has merit, AHAM believes the next step could be to launch a stakeholder process to hammer out the details, including development of accompanying evaluation, measurement, and verification protocols. Ideally, such a process could bring together many of the stakeholders represented on today's call. Our analysis builds on current rebate programs and demonstrates the potential of linked rebates to secure much greater value for these programs via energy efficiency and GHG reduction. The full AHAM analysis is presented in a comprehensive technical support document that accompanied our comments on the proposed Clean Power Plan. We've shared the analysis with EPA and DOE, and a link to the TSD was included in the invitation to this webinar. We'll cover the highlights of the TSD today in our presentation, and we look forward to addressing your questions in the Q&A period. We developed the analysis to quantify the energy savings and GHG reductions from our prototype national program, but we also wanted to see how large these benefits might be and how cost-effective the program might be in achieving them, so there would be a basis for comparison to other energy efficiency options. The TSD showed that the benefits could be quite large, as you can see here. Our analysis was based on a 5-year program on a national scale, and these figures represent the total cost and benefits over that period. We'll be explaining how we calculated these benefits and presenting them in greater detail shortly. This discussion overview slide shows the sequence of issues that we're going to cover. We start with a discussion of rebate programs, then focus on our methodology. This is followed by a presentation of the results, and we conclude with a discussion of next steps. At this point, I'll ask Kevin Messner of Political Logic, who's helped us with this initiative, to guide us through the next phase of the presentation.
Thanks, Rob. I'm going to go through, there's a very complicated analysis, but we're going to go through it fairly quickly, but trying to get into the details, and so that we can leave time for questions at the end. So we're trying to balance the need to get into the details with also the timing on that. So bear with me on some of the slides, and we can get into more detail in the questions. So just to level set everyone. Rebate programs have been, I think, broadly agreed that they're very successful on efficiency programs. What we have here is the chart showing the average. This is for refrigerators. This technical support is focused on refrigerators only. What you see here is the average energy consumption over time, and it's gone down drastically. And so that's a good thing. But what we saw, if you compare on the normal purchase rebates versus Energy Star in 2008 was 20% better. And so you're at an average of 500 kilowatt hours per year, so 20% of 500 is 100 kilowatt hours that utilities have to deal with the cost benefit. But now we're at 10% of about 400 kilowatt hours, so you only have 40 kilowatt hours on a net Energy Star above. That's just a rough kind of gauge. So this, as you can tell, makes it more and more difficult to get the cost-benefit analysis to work on a purchase-only rebate. So the early replacement concept is to look at, today we have this purchase rebate, which is looking at somebody that's in the store, comparing Energy Star generally. There's higher levels than that, but Energy Star versus non-Energy Star. They're already in the store, and try to incentivize them to go to the more efficient model. Then also you have a disposal rebate out there that are very prolific, and those are focused on getting the old unit out of the house off the grid. And they're siloed. By and large, in almost every case, they're siloed. There's a wall between them. And the concept with early replacement is to bridge those two, bring them together, and there's a number of benefits that can be seen from bringing those together. So the current model, you have to deal with free riders at the purchase, free riders at disposal. They both have free riders, and they both will be higher free riders than if you bring them together. We'll get into that in some detail. And let me back up a little bit and mention that we did a survey of the rebates that are out there and only found that 0.2 to 0.4% of the households in the U.S. actually link these two rebates together. Everyone else, everywhere else, they're completely separated. And then we have the new paradigm now where we link the two together, so you would reduce free riders, and you'll get greater efficiency, you'll increase the participation, and you'll be able to get a higher bang because you'll have a higher rebate amount. So instead of having a purchase rebate for, let's say, $70 and a disposal rebate for $30, the $70 rebate is somebody that's in the store incentivizing that purchase. The disposal is dealing with somebody who wants to get off the grid. And then part of that disposal rebate, you have to pay for the empty truck to go to the house. That could be upwards, maybe $60, $70. You take that $60, $70, $30 for the disposal, $70 for the purchase, you now have a $100 plus rebate that is going to incentivize somebody to get off the couch, get into the store, replace their unit, get the old one off the grid, save on their utility bills, and also be seen and promoted through the utilities and also through retailers and manufacturers and the like. So, wanted to mention the Clean Power Plan. Rob already mentioned that. The Clean Power Plan, however your feeling is on it, DPA is moving forward with it. And what we wanted to start, when we started this technical analysis, we wanted to see if when this becomes reality and utilities have an obligation, would a early replacement program provide a low-cost option to meet the efficiency obligations? Because if it's not a low-cost option and the utilities won't choose or won't consider doing this, then there's no need to go on. So we did the analysis and found, in fact, it is a low-cost option for utilities to consider when they and if they have to meet these obligations under the Clean Power Plan. So now I want to get into, I have to level set a little bit on the methodology. And the first overview, trying to overview simplistically on this, is generally you have to find the difference in the average efficiency before and after the program. You have to find out what the remaining useful life is of the unit or the units that have been taken off the grid. You have to figure out what the free riders are, because you don't want to count those, and then you aggregate the whole savings. So we'll get into a little more detail on each of these steps. So this is a very complicated equation. Wouldn't focus so much on the variables and the inputs right now. We'll go into each of these in a little more detail. What we're in now is the phase of considering and calculating business as usual. And just at a high level, it's looking at the average energy consumption of the units, and you have to look at the age of the unit, and then you have to look at the age profile of the units for each year. We went back for 50 years, so 1965, what's the age makeup, what's the energy makeup of each of those, to create a starting point for this calculation. So the first variable is the average energy consumption. Pretty simple in the sense that there's AHAM data that has historical annual energy consumption of the fleet of refrigerators over time. So we use that. We also, AHAM has the annual shipments over time. So that's how you're able to go back into the prior years and figure out what the average energy is and what the annual shipments are and start getting an age profile. The other thing that's important is you need to figure out how units come off the grid in a natural way, in the business as usual way. What's their survival rate? When are they coming out? How old? What is the age profile of how they come off? From this, we took from DOE's technical support document the survival function that they used, and we used that as a starting point. DOE's technical support document assumed a mean age of units coming off the grid to be 17.1 years. We use that number. We have data, and there's a lot of data out there that exists, that the real average age of a refrigerator that comes off the grid that ends up being recycled is 20, 25 years old. But we wanted to do with the conservative, go with what DOE had at 17.1, because we wanted our analysis to be credible and conservative and starting point. So that's what we had with the survival profile. You put all those factors together, you come up with this type of chart. This chart is showing, you just pick a year on the x-axis, let's say 2011 with the numbers that go up. And if you go up on the y-axis, each color is telling you the amount of energy, or I'm sorry, the number of units that are on the grid and what their age is. So the black area at the bottom shows you have around 22 million units that are 15 years and 15 years and older. Up at the top, 1 year, you show that bandwidth. That shows you how many million units are 1 year old. So it gives you, we have this data now that goes across the year and how old the units makeup are for each year. So this feeds into that calculation, and it's a double summation. We factored in the unit degradation of the units coming off, and you go through that whole calculation in a very complex model, and you come up with the average energy of a unit that's disposed of is 675 kilowatt hours per year. So that's the business as usual. Now we're switching into the early replacement. How do you factor in and calculate what the program would do? So that program, we're starting with what are the parameters of that program? We assumed a 5-year program that would go for 5 years, and the average rebate was $100. We think it would be more than $100, but again, to be conservative, $100. And you could do, and part of our support is also you could do a tiered Energy Star amount as well, $125 for Energy Star as well. But for this analysis, it's $100 rebate, 3 million rebates per year, and that all refrigerators are removed from the grid. Now, the 3 million rebate gets into building a little bit from the CR program, which is the State Energy Efficiency Appliance Rebate Program that was part of the federal stimulus a few years ago. This program was $300 million, and it was wildly, I think it's safe to say, wildly successful. DOE managed it. I know we were very happy with how it played out, and it provided about 1.5 million rebates for just that program for $300 million. And that was just a very targeted and only $300 million across the country. And every state did their own thing, and even under that whole scenario, wildly successful. Part of that State Energy Efficiency Appliance Rebate Program, we then, since that is a fantastic national model, pilot program really, of what an early replacement program would do, because that rebate program required the purchase of a new and the disposal of the old, we needed to figure out what is the average age of a unit that is induced off the grid by a rebate program. And we did that by looking at upwards 100,000 or so data points to figure out what the age of a unit was that was induced off the grid, that came off the grid from the CR program. That came out to be 14.6 years. So that at least it's fitting together how you would think of it, that it's inducing refrigerators off that are younger than the 17 or 20 years or whatever number you want to assume for a business as usual. So the rebate had an impact, had a big impact, and we know through our data, through shipments and through retailers, that the CR program did have an impact. The data proved out to be consistent with that, which is always nice. So then we had 14.6 years. What we did then is now you have to go back and think back to the survival function that I mentioned earlier with DOE. That was a survival function that was based on business as usual with an average of 17.1. We took that same concept, but we had to reshape the curve to then move the average down to 14.6 years, and then also reshape it to how the unit's age profile would be. And we have some data on the audits, recycling landfill audits, on what that shape should be. We put those two together, and through that same type of analysis, you come up with the average energy of the old unit being induced off the grid by the rebate at 601 kilowatt hours. So again, it's less than the other, which is what you would think it would be, because they're newer units, so they are more efficient. Now you have to get that information and go to the next step, and the next step is trying to figure out what the average energy savings is across the whole program, which is the business as usual minus the ones pulled off. We started with that concept with the DOE UMP, the Uniform Methods Program Protocol. They had one developed through many stakeholders and experts to figure out how to determine that for a disposal-only program. And they have three basic scenarios for disposal. You might transfer the refrigerator to a secondary market. You might sell it on Craigslist. That's the transfer. Second possibility, you might dispose of the refrigerator. And in this case, we call them a disposal-free rider because they were already planning on disposing of it, but they're getting the rebate. Or they might have kept the unit and put it as a second fridge in the basement. Those were the three disposal scenarios. Now we needed to expand. Don't get too right in detail on this decision tree. This is an expanded decision tree, and we're going to go through it in detail. The first one is that you have to add purchase scenarios. You link the two together, so now you have the purchase scenarios and the disposal scenarios. So each of those then further complicate the UMP disposal scenario, and so you now have 9 possible scenarios instead of 3. So we're going to go through each of these scenarios and how we came up with the weightings for each of those scenarios, which it's very important. So the first is the planned purchase of the unit. Someone was already planning to buy a new unit. They would be your traditional purchase-free rider. We weighted that at 30%. That was based on a study that said a conservative free ridership rate of 20%. Again, we wanted to be conservative. We went with 30%. Then you have 70% left over from the 30%, and how we divided that up between somebody who was planning on purchasing a used unit. Another scenario, the other scenario is somebody was not planning on purchasing any unit, whether it was new or used. They had no, they were the Simpsons sitting on the couch, not planning to buy anything. That, we broke those up based on the using UMP's default induced replacement assumption of 95.5. And that was don't have time to go into the detail on that, but that's in the UMP, and it's based on a lot of evaluation reports that were brought as part of that group. That's how you get those weightings, 30% from a study, and then dividing up the other two based on UMP. Now you have the disposal scenarios. You start with the disposal-free riders. That's the 33%. We got that number. We did evaluation of the 29 most recent evaluation reports that are already out there, that are done by evaluators and the like and utilities. And we brought them all together and figured out what the average weighted was based on population, and it's 33%. So 33% disposal-free riders. Then we divided up the remaining 67% between transferred and kept. That's the same ratio, again, as UMP, which is, well, it's the same ratio that had a transferred and kept in UMP's default function. So we tried to maintain as much consistency. Well, we maintained consistency with that. Now we'll go to the next step. Now you've used all of that scenarios to arrive at what proportion of the program applies to each of the possible mixes of scenarios between purchase and disposal to get a percentage in the left column, a proportion of the program. Then in the next column, you'll have the annual energy without the program and average energy with the program. So one quick example. Average energy without the program, if the scenario is I was going to buy a new unit and I was going to put the old one in the refrigerator, then that energy would be without the program, you would have the energy of the new unit plus the energy of the old unit. Then with the next column, which is minus, then annual energy consumption with program, I would need to dispose of that refrigerator, so that energy would now be just the energy on the grid would be of the new unit. So you would subtract those two out, and your savings would be the energy of the old unit that was taken out. Each of those scenarios are gone through. You'll notice that some are actually negative. So there's certain scenarios where with the purchase rebate actually incentivized somebody to buy a unit or get something off, and depending on how it works out, you would actually have a net inducement to put energy on the grid. So that's all calculated in there too. You add up that far right column, and it's already weighted by the percentages based on the weightings, and you come up with the net weight weighted average annual energy savings of 588 kilowatt hours per unit per year. And you calculate the average remaining useful life of those units that were taken off to be 5.94 years. And we can get in, that's a very complicated calculation, and we have some slides if we have time at the end and people are interested in. We can go into that in much more detail. It's an interesting calculation. Okay, now we're going to go into the results. Once you get through all of that, the result calculations are now much more straightforward. So once you have the per unit energy savings, you now just simply multiply it times the number of units. That's 15 million units, which is 3 million rebates per year for 5 years. 3 times 5 is 15. You multiply that times the average per unit. Let me back up. So if you're thinking the decision tree that you saw, there's actually 5 decision trees for each program year, and then the one that you're seeing is a roll-up of all the 5 years. So it's a shipment weighted, yearly weighted, all the way through. This is to get the final true average savings. So that's times 15 million, and then it's a simple calculation to the carbon savings using the EPA calculator to get to the 36 million metric tons of carbon equivalent, and then you come up with the program cost of 2.86 cents, which is we have heard, and it's a very competitive program cost for utilities to consider. Now this chart, this is looking at what the carbon emission savings is of the program. So just starting here with the blue. Blue is the first program year. So why you're seeing it tailing off is you're seeing in 2016 you're pulling off units early. They would have already been on the grid, but you're pulling them off early, so you're getting carbon emission savings. The next year you're seeing it's a little less. Well, it's a little less because those units, some of those units that you pulled off early would have, on the business as usual and survivability rate, would have come off naturally. So you can't claim the carbon emission savings for that. You can only claim the carbon emission savings for that unit for only 1 year. And so each year that you go on, it scales down because they would have normally come off anyways. So this is all, again, net free riders, net business as usual. This is the carbon emission savings for 2016 program year. Then the next one adds on the next program year, 2017. Then you add on the next program year, the next program year, and the next program year, and then you get the full emission savings by year of this program. Net all the business as usual, net all the free riders. So under the Clean Power Plan, too, we wanted to understand how exactly would this be something of significance to the utilities. Here's some states. Some states we think should be on this call, and you'll be able to see where your state is. This is a graph that depicts what the efficiency obligation could be under the Clean Power Plan, and the blue part is the percentage of that total obligation that could be fulfilled by this early replacement program. So it's pretty significant in every state, and it's very significant in other states, but it would have a big impact for utilities. So main conclusion, just to reiterate, and some other new things that we wanted to mention, is that there's energy savings and carbon savings. Yes, we've already covered those. But the minimizing free riders, I wanted to give one example of that. If you're in a store for a purchase rebate, you're in the store, you are already going to buy the Energy Star unit, that's a purchase free rider. Now, if that person then goes to the checkout to get the rebate, then on the traditional system, they'd be a free rider. But if you have an early replacement linked rebate, then the cashier would say, you got a $100 rebate, $150 rebate. The consumer would say, great, I'll take it. They say, well, hold on. What you have an older refrigerator? Yes, I do. What were you going to do with that? Well, I was going to put it in the basement. Well, you don't get the $150. Oh, okay, well, what do I need to do to get the $150? You need to dispose of that. Okay, I will. Now they got the $150. That purchase free rider has now become an early replacement non-free rider because that has now incentivized them to make a behavioral change. So when you bring these two together, the percent of free riders drops dramatically. We assumed in that decision tree there are 33% decision disposal free riders, 30% purchase free riders. When you link the two together, you're at about a 10% free ridership. The other thing that we looked at is there's this traditional thinking that on a disposal rebate, you should set an age requirement. You only want to go after the old units, 15-year-old units, because those are the ones that use more energy. We need to target those. Well, we wanted to test that hypothesis, and we did, and we found out that's wrong. So what happens is twofold. One is you reduce the participation of the program dramatically because, one, you're only going after the 15-year-old refrigerators, which limits it. Two, the consumer, it's not straightforward. It's not like the Cash for Clunker program where everybody knew you turn in an old car and you get $3,500 back. They say, oh, wait, there's some caveats here. It sounds like a bait and switch. They get skeptical, and so you lose participation there as well. So the other important factor here is that if you run the numbers, and you actually run the numbers on this, if you take the net energy savings between a 15-year-old refrigerator and a new one, which is bigger than the net energy savings of a 2-year-old refrigerator and a new one, but then you have to multiply both of those by the remaining useful life. The remaining useful life of a 15-year-old refrigerator is less than the remaining useful life of a 2-year-old refrigerator. And when you run the numbers and you do a sensitivity analysis, you will see that the remaining useful life actually has a slightly bigger impact than the change in energy. So again, the energy savings, it's better not to have a minimum age requirement for a number of reasons. The last point I wanted to make on this is that one of the things that's important to know about that net energy savings too is because there was just a DOE energy standard change for refrigerator just last year. And so even if that happened this year, a new refrigerator today at the federal minimum is on average approximately, it varies from product classes, but around 25% just from a year ago. So it's a significant jump. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rob for some of our ideas of next steps.
All right, thanks, Kevin. So as suggested earlier, we think that TSD is a solid first pass at a methodology for determining the costs and benefits of linked disposal and purchase rebate programs for refrigerators. But we also recognize there's room for discussion about the specific aspects of the methodology and the AHAM calculations. So we hope that questions have been coming in or that folks have questions to pose now, and we look forward to answering some of them in more detail. But if there's agreement that the linked rebate concept has merit and should be adopted more broadly, then we'd hope that there would be strong interest in refining the methodology and bringing additional data into the discussion. We think the best way to do this would be a stakeholder process using the TSD as a starting point, but building on it with additional input from a lot of the different interests that are represented on this call. And that's not just the evaluators and utilities, but also state government representatives, the efficiency advocates, and other groups who have an interest in these sorts of programs and the advantages and benefits they can bring. We think a model protocol could provide a strong basis for including refrigerator early replacement programs, as we said, in state implementation plans under the Clean Power Plan, and developing a model protocol would facilitate the adoption, approval, and implementation of these programs at the local level. So as part of your feedback on the AHAM presentation, we'd be interested in your thoughts on these or other next steps. Alex and Ed, are we at a point where we've got some questions that have come in?
We do actually. We have a couple of questions. I think actually there's more and more keep coming in. Actually, they're starting to pile in, which is great. Let's go back up to the top. So one of the early questions was, and actually we can answer this one quickly, will the presentation be available after the talk? Yes, it will. We'll send it out to the webinar participants so they can see that. I believe everybody's already been sent the link to the original CSD as well. so they have access to a lot of the nitty-gritty details that AHAM provided as part of the TSD to go through. One of the first questions was talking about calculating the average remaining useful life, and I believe Kevin mentioned that you have some slides that can actually go through some of that. So why don't we take a second, we'll go through the average remaining useful life calculation and see if we're getting more feedback on that. Does that sound good?
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to switch to, okay, remaining useful life. Now this is going to take a little time, and luckily, and we have time, which is good to go through this. I think people may find this very interesting, and we welcome feedback on this. So I'm going to try to go through it step by step, and I'll try to make it clear. So you've already seen this, we call the rainbow chart up on the left, which is the age profile per year, and you have the survival function. So the first thing that needs to be done is to, down below, let's just, for an example, you take that year, 2016, and we're taking those numbers, and you'll see now how they're going across the chart at the bottom. The year you'll see at the top, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you see 2016 on the left, or 2015 on the left. And this shows you all the number of units by age in year 2016. So that's the first data point. Then you have to figure out how many of those are going to come off the grid naturally. That's where this survival function comes in. Use the survival function to then get to the next row down, which is the negatives, on how many units will come off the grid business as usual. Then you subtract those out, and that'll get how many are left on the grid that could be induced off by the rebate. Then you're going to go to do the same thing for the next thing. You start again with a rainbow chart. Now we're using the inducement function, different than survivability. This is the one that used the 14.6-year average. It's a different, slightly different function, same concept. Using that to then determine what comes off based on the rebate. So you've got starting point, business as usual coming off, what's left on the grid, what now is coming off based on the rebate program, what is induced off the grid beyond business as usual. This is the whole, I mentioned the 14.6 years, and applying that across the second portion to figure out how many units are left. So that bottom row, if you go across the bottom row, it'll go, keep going to the next one. So now you're going down to the flow of every year, how many of those units are being induced off the grid, and you flow it out to the years into the future. So these numbers that you see here are depicting how many are coming off. Then that feeds into, then you can calculate what the percentage of total units that are coming off the grid, that are coming off and their age. That then leads you into the remaining useful life. We have it broken off with free riders, and then the remaining useful life of total. So the remaining useful life of the non-free riders was 8.86, and then the remaining useful life of the free riders is 0. And so the weighted average of the 8.86 and 0 turns out to be 5.94 years for the remaining useful life of those units that were induced off the grid. So hope that we were able to explain that as best we can. And hard, I guess we can't, I don't know if we can get follow-up questions or not, but maybe I have to leave it at that.
I think we can pause for a second.
Okay.
Follow-up questions come in. Just give it a few seconds to see if anyone has any follow-up questions. Keep going down. I'm not seeing any follow-up questions.
Okay.
Actually, here's one.
So the question is whether this is more granular than we use today. So I don't know what you use today, and necessarily if you're, and whether you're from the utility or as a general sense, but what this is not a simple of 17-year average minus 14.6 years on what the average age induced and average age not induced. So if that's more granular, then yes. If there's some other different calculation that people are using, then maybe it's a different way and just as granular.
And one of the questions that were sent out was around this topic, actually. So if there is data that's being used within the utility evaluation program, please send it in and share that with DOE, who will ultimately share it with AHAM as well. So that'd be great.
Okay. So the other question was whether there's a variance between the states. Our analysis was a national averaging. Whether we did not go into whether the state-by-state analysis of the program. Now we could with the CRP data we have the state-by-state and can look at that, but that was not part of this calculation. So the capability is there, but it's not part of the TSD. So the next question is, how do you ensure the minimal to no transfer resale and guarantee RAD recycling of units that are retired? So that's two things here. Guaranteed recycling. That's the way that the rebate would be structured is you don't get the rebate until there's a certification or some sort that happens to ensure that that unit is removed from the grid. That would be just an inherent part of the program. Whether it's how it's recycled or what it's recycled, our assumptions are that it would go through the current very successful, actually, market-driven system where depending on the type used, 50% of the foam emissions are captured, and it's can be profitable and it's very successful. And it's 90% recycling. So that system is very impactful, and that's what we assumed in our analysis. So the next question is, have we created a tool that could be used to input the variables? So that's a great question, and actually we talked about the stakeholder working group, and that's exactly what we would see and like to see happen, assuming everyone's in agreement, to have the stakeholder group come together and get almost call it a TurboTax type concept where there would be a model-based backup where everyone would have input and work with us and utilities and all the stakeholders, interest, and experts to come up with exactly that. Our view is that would be very useful, and we would like to be an active and willing participant in that type of activity. So the question is, how does this approach apply to low income? This is more conceptually, I guess, than nothing necessarily in the data per se. So one of the, this is actually, the bottom line is this is much better for low income. So the current trend is let's go to a rebate because of the purchase rebate net energy between new and new. It drives the calculation incentive to a, let's say, most efficient appliance, which are generally the higher end units, fully featured units. And so if you're low income and you're getting a $75 or $100 rebate for most efficient, and it's a higher end unit, you're probably not going to be part of this program. And even Energy Star, same thing for Energy Star. But if you have an early replacement program that doesn't necessitate an incentive for something above the federal minimum, now you're able to get at what the low-income people could impact, which are the less fully featured and more valued option appliances. So this is directly and probably would have a bigger impact on the low income, and that's where the broader participation would happen. So excellent question. Oh, there was a question on whether the $100, whether you could do a $50 for maybe a tiered or for another appliance. Definitely. This program is well modeled to where if you've already got a truck driving to the home, dropping off a new one, it's an empty truck there, you pick up the old, it's the most economical way to do it. And while you're there, you got a room air conditioner? Sure, we got a $35, $50 rebate for that too. You got a third refrigerator? We'll take that and we'll give you some money for that. So it's the most economical way to get these units out of the home and off the grid without having to send an empty truck there. So the one question was where someone saw the 330 kilowatt hours in the decision tree. That's the average of a new unit. So through an early replacement program, you would have a new unit on the grid. That's the whole purpose, to replace the new with the old. So that's where the 330 is. And we'll try to get that well. We're looking at the next question so that people understand where the 330 is that weren't focused on that. So the one question is on here where these average energy consumptions came from. That's the whole modeling of the that kind of double summation equation and the inducement curve. Those are the results when you go through that very difficult, or not difficult, very complicated spreadsheet of 50 years by the age. You calculate that and that's over a 5-year period over each area. I hope that answered the question. So one question came in asking about whether an appliance was not even working. And I've heard that before, and it's a good question. And conceptually you think, hey, if the appliance is broken, then why are we paying to get it off the grid? Well, it still is important to get it off the grid for a big reason, and that's the secondary market. The secondary market, and we'll have some slides here to get into, well, actually we can go to those now. The secondary market, a lot of these units end up on the secondary market. And we have a big research, and so So this unit might not be working, but a lot of times it just needs a small part to fix it. So we do a consumer research study every 5 years, and we have one that's just coming out, brand new, and we took a deeper dive on the secondary market. And what this consumer research says is that disposed appliances are often repaired and refurbished and then sold on the secondary market. And disposal rebates it's hard to compete with Craigslist, but rebates do impact disposal decisions. So here's just one example of hundreds of slides on this data, which we're happy to share if people are interested and to be part of the stakeholder working group to provide this. It's rich, data rich. But what this is showing here, at least highlighting that 22% of the refrigerators that people buy are used. 22%. So that's a big number. So just because it's not working doesn't mean it's not going to have to go off the grid. And AHAM could have a webinar of this as well, too. So the question is, what confidence do we have that this will induce somebody who are not planning to purchase a new unit to do that? Kind of I think what they meant is going back to the Simpsons couch slide, get the Simpsons off the couch to buy a new unit. Well, we don't have any data directly on this, although there in this AHAM consumer survey, it gets at that exact question on what rebates impact they have and what is the average amount. So just on this slide, you see at the bottom left-hand corner that 22 received a purchase rebate and the average rebate was $172. And then we have some others. We can delve into some of these other information. We don't have a lot of slides on this right here today on what would be the right, that's a million-dollar question, is what's the amount that the rebate needs to do to pull somebody off the couch into the store. Just intuitively, you know, the higher the better. What's the high enough number to do that, but low enough where you're not overpaying? That's a good question, and it's another question that a stakeholder group, where we would relish and welcome that discussion, and we would be happy to share the data that we have on that to figure out what the sweet spot is. So the other question is, if you already have a linked program for disposal and purchase, how does the new standard help in this area? Well, for one, the energy savings of a newer unit are dramatic. We negotiated our energy savings with the advocates, with the energy efficiency folks, and all the stakeholder interest groups, and worked with DOE on this, and those were final. And they just were increased in their efficiency standards last September. So on average, you're going to see a 25% increase in energy just for the federal minimum. And then the Energy Star spec went up, changed their spec to 10% above the new federal minimum. So if you have old calculations on this based on last year's numbers, then I'd recommend you redo them based on the new standards. there's a question on whether we've looked at the resale value of a refrigerator versus the recycled value. Yes. The general answer to that is the refrigerator resale value, if it can be refurbished and resold, is much higher than the recycled value. They both have value. There's positive value of the refrigerator end of life for its materials for recycling. That's what drives a highly successful recycled program. But if it can be resold on Craigslist for $100 and $150 or refurbished and sold in a secondhand store for $200 or $300, then that's going to be more.
So I think we got a couple people chime in that they're having a hard time hearing or seeing it. So hopefully you get to see the questions now and who's asking the questions, and we'll try to read them each time. I think we'll go down a little bit. I know up a little bit. We're still up. Okay. I still can't see the questions. All right. Sorry. My apologies. You still can't see the question. But we will try to repeat them so that everybody can hear it. There was a follow-on question actually on the previous one, if you want to go. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah. If you looked at, when we talked about the difference between recycling and replacing, if you looked at it to cover the difference in terms of the rebates, how did you determine the level of rebate between the two? Yeah.
So the value of the recycled unit, I'm trying to understand where, so the refrigerator, the inherent value of the refrigerator would, as a general rule, pay for an efficient recycling process. Now, if it's not the most efficient process, for example, on a disposal rebate, if you have to send an empty truck to the house, then that's where the disposal rebates have to include payments to send the truck out to the house, basically. So I'm not sure if that answers the question or not, but it's the theory we have on the early replacement program is that you have a high enough rebate where you can also do it in the most efficient way and drive the recycling, and then the inherent value of the refrigerator plus the rebate would be an incentive for not only the consumer but others to then get the unit off the grid. Okay, so one question is about how utilities often have included the total cost of the unit for the early replacement program, where the incremental cost is included when the inducement is made. This would be a great topic to talk about again at the stakeholder meeting, but one thing I do want to mention is there are a number of things that we've seen that aren't so much the utilities. Well, the utilities are doing it, but not on their own volition. They are being required to do things by the Public Utility Commission. One example, I can never understand why, but the California PUC requires on their DEER database 11-year useful life or effective useful life for the refrigerator, which is so far from reality, and that really cuts into the efficiency programs. If the PUCs would modernize and look at the way that some of these early replacements in a broader sense and let the utilities be able to incorporate some of these things in the analysis, like getting rid of the 15-year-old refrigerator, doing a realistic free ridership percentage, then there's a lot of energy efficiency savings that could be achieved that aren't today because of these barriers we have found from the PUC. So another question is how we think this would be advertised. So it could be done if it's done on a broad enough scale and in a uniform scale. The more uniform it would be nationally. In a perfect world, we understand that there's 50 PUCs and over 3,000 or more utilities. But at the more national uniformity there could be, the more that manufacturers and national retailers would be able to be willing to invest in a marketing of this program. And that's another reason why, quite frankly, we're here with the Department of Energy. They are well situated, have a lot of expertise, have a national impact. They have appliance standards, data and expertise. They have energy efficiency expertise. They've got a lot of knowledge, and they would provide, we think, and we pat them on the back actually for this, a lot of good information and feedback to really lead and guide a stakeholder working group in this area. So one question was, how do we determine the age by the model number? That's a great question, because I don't know how many times I've heard, oh, we know the age of these units. How? Oh, we got the model number. Or, well, we knew it was olive green, so that's 1960s, 70s-ish. Or there's websites out there. You just put in the model number, and there's the age. Well, we represent the appliance manufacturers, and we, working actually with DOE on the CR program, did an analysis on how you determine the age, and to determine the age to get the 14.6 through model numbers. Very, very difficult. And there's been, just by virtue of the industry with mergers and acquisitions and changes, the whole model key is for going back 20, 30 years. It's very difficult, if not impossible to do. So you may ask, well, then what'd you do? How'd you come up with 14.6? Well, what we did is we were able to then, based on input with the manufacturers and utilizing the multiple databases and certification, and then we have a huge amount of historical certification databases on models and years, able to then, with the AHAM historical data and some of these other newer databases, to then pull together. Actually, it was a very, very complicated, that's a whole other webinar, very, very complicated analysis, and working with DOE, who was just tremendous on it, to get at what that average age is based on the model. And it's plus or minus a year or so. It's not, that 14.6 is a very good, robust estimate, but probably, as far as we can tell, and we spent a lot of time on this, probably the most accurate data that you can get on that. But it is not precise. So the other question is, what about a customer who's buying their first fridge? Heard that before. Also, what if somebody just wants to get rid of the old one? This doesn't help either of those cases. That's true, and that's fine. We're not saying get rid of those programs. You can still have a disposal-only rebate to get those energy savings. You could still have a purchase-only rebate. We're not saying you need to eliminate these. We're saying that that this is a better one, it's broader, and this should be the big emphasis. But for those special cases, you can continue to have those. There's no reason not to. If the numbers make it work out, then great. So the other question was a unit that's not working. Not necessarily broken, but not working, or sorry, not being used, not plugged in. That's still, there's the same type of, our view is the same situation. It may not be plugged in now. That doesn't mean it won't be plugged in later. And and maybe there are some pack rats out there who just keep a refrigerator in their garage and don't plug it in for 20 years and never use it and then throw it away. I doubt that's a very happening very much. But what we did as part of this consumer rebate or consumer research study, we actually looked. It wasn't just refrigerators. There's also clothes washers and laundry. You'd be surprised to learn. I certainly was surprised to see that there are a number of clothes washers that remain on the grid, that are put in the garage, that are kept, or that are transferred, given to their kid after college or something like that, or are even kept in the home as a second clothes washer. So we do this every 5 years, and we notice there are changes in this. So again, part of our feeling is it's time to rethink these things. We can't just go on what we've been working on, the assumptions that have been going on for the last 10 years. So the question is how, on retailers, what kind of work have we done with retailers and what would that process look like? We work very closely with retailers. We are the retailers' customers, and we have worked with them on this. Now, not to the specific detail of how this process would work out. As folks that were involved with the CR process know, each state did it somewhat differently. You could have point of purchase, you could have mail-in vouchers. There's a lot of different ways to do this. We're not here to say that we're the experts in that. That's, again, to mention the stakeholder group again, that's the other reason for the stakeholder group to get all these experts in the room and figure out, hey, retailers, what do you want to do? What's the best way to do it? But are they generally supportive without being able to speak for them? But they have supported us in efforts on bills and in an area on on rebate programs. So, and we would welcome their and want and need their active engagement and support. And I don't think that would be, well, I'll leave it at that. So the question is, what can we do to encourage retailers when they pick up a unit to recycle it? I would say we could probably do as much as maybe as persuasive as we are maybe in speaking with them. That's about it. We're their customer, and those retailers need to have a process that they need to determine what they're going to do with that. If it's a disposal rebate, they're going to recycle it. If it's a not, that gets into the economics of the secondary market, and it gets into the business and the economics of the secondary market. And that's one of the reasons why the early replacement would help in making that economic model work out, so that you have a business case for it.
Kevin, if I could just add one thing to that. Part of the question was, what can you do to help incentivize taking away another unit if they have two older refrigerators at the house where a delivery is made? And I think it's very possible that a program could include a second rebate to build on the first one and incentivize taking even more demand off the grid.
Yep, thank you. Okay, so there's another question on 330, and understand what the question is that the 330 seems low. I should have, that's actually very, very good and very insightful. So the 330, there's two, for getting really into the weeds now, there are two test procedures for refrigerators. When the standard changed, there was a test procedure change. The test procedure change impact the energy that was displayed. And it actually displayed more energy, or attributed more energy than with some of the new features that the old test procedure did not. And that's a whole other discussion, but that 330, what we did our analysis all based on the old test procedure. And so that 330, if you actually think of it in today's, if you're looking at today's recertification under the new test procedure, you would bump, that number would be bumped up. So I hope that helps explain that. So the question is, do we have data on washing, clothes washer purchasing behavior? Yes. That consumer research study has tens, if not 50, 60 odd slides and information on clothes washers that go through all of the behaviors, the purchase, and a number of characteristics. So, and we have the one that was 5 years before that as well. So yes, we do, and we'd be happy to, again, share that stakeholder working group, or if necessary, we can do an AHAM webinar on that alone. We're getting some questions on the secondary market, on the interest into that, and I would just say that we share that. We have spent a lot of time trying to get into and figure out the data. This consumer research is our latest and best effort. It's based, I should go a little more on that since there's interest in it, is this secondary market, our research survey is a survey of consumers. So it's asking consumers, and it's not just asking 10 consumers. This is statistically, and there's all, we wish we could go into more detail, but it is, we have and we asked what their impact is on the secondary market for not just refrigerators and clothes washers, but a number of other appliances. So again, very important discussion, and we're hungry for more data out if there is as well. But as far as I can tell right now, we've got the best data out there in that area. But I'm happy to be, if others have better, then we're more than open to it. Somebody asked how the consumer research study was funded. That was an AHAM study. We do that every 5 or so years. It's part of what AHAM brings to the world.
So one of the questions that had come up was what would be the next steps that we should look for in moving this new program forward? And we've mentioned a couple times that we think that the ideal path would be a stakeholder working group that brings together the different parties that have an interest in these sorts of programs. We'd offer up our model as a starting point for discussion, but we certainly recognize that there is additional information and value that the other voices or other groups represented on this webinar would be able to bring to that to improve the product and ultimately develop a model early replacement program, and then some representative EM and V tools that could go with it. I would encourage anybody who thinks that that's a good idea to mention that in any follow-up questions that you provide as a response to the webinar.
And we're just there's 3 other slides that we have time to get to that we're going to go through real quickly as well, which is great. And it's just more on the results side that people may be interested in. So we're going to switch back and okay, so the first slide I just wanted to go on is the age restriction. I already went into that, but this is just the showing the data. This is the age, cutoff age at the bottom. As the x-axis goes on to the right, the cutoff age, for example, if it was a 15-year-old refrigerator, you see 15, you go up there. That shows you the metric tons that would be taken off based on that age requirement, kind of this sensitivity analysis to our modeling. And what you see is it maxes out when the age is 0. And then there's another chart in there that we can put in that shows the cost and how the cost is attributable, and the cost is minimized and the carbon reductions are maximized. The next result slide I wanted to share real quickly in our last remaining time. This is based on EPA's AVERT model. For those of you who are in that neck of the woods, this just gets out the air emissions, so we plug some of our data into the AVERT model, and here are some of the results by region. So there's one question about regional. This is one thing that we did have prepared for today by region on the SOx, NOx, and carbon that could be attributable on a more of a regional basis. The other one is the COBRA. Go to the COBRA one. It's an EPA's COBRA analysis, health, human impact. Here's some of the results of that you can see on the screen that are based on that, mortality, asthma, heart attack, and kind of the annual and the impacts that it has on those.
And all these extra slides will be part of the package that we can send out to everyone. Great.
Yes.
Okay.
So, any other question mark?
Somebody asked a question as to whether AHAM is partnering with EPA on their Flip Your Fridge program, which has just started as of Earth Day, so I guess last week. We are not specifically as an association, but many of our member companies are actively involved in supporting the Flip Your Fridge initiative.
And there's another question on the CFCs contained in the installation. So part of our program is assuming that the emissions from the foam are dealt with through the market-driven successful system where it goes through an auto shredder. That, and we can share this analysis. It's not our study; it's someone else's study. That captures, and it depends on the blowing agent. That covers half. That captures half of the emissions through that process, and it's a profitable system that provides that very successful model. So there's a question on the free rider percentage on the planned purchase acquisition. We struggled a lot with the free riders, which I think everyone does. I think our impression is that California is way too high, and then there's another one that we found that was 0, and that's probably too low. And then there's the whole discussion of net to gross versus gross. That, again, stakeholder group. Utilities are experts in this area. The evaluators are experts in this area. We found a study that had the 20%. We used 30%, and we'd like to discuss whether how exactly that could be done. And maybe free rider is a topic that everyone's interested in. Maybe DOE has some ability to provide some expertise in that. Maybe that's a subject that the folks want to talk about. There's one question on we developed a logic model for this program. So yeah, I mean this whole TSD, the whole analysis is a logic model, the decision tree, the Excel. The TSD, if you want to get into that level of detail, the TSD hopefully will explain a lot of that to you. And again, we're happy to go into more detail. We could spend days on this and are happy to for those that are interested.
Well, and as a reminder, we'll be responding in writing to the questions that come in, and everybody is encouraged not only to submit questions now, but for a week, I believe, the record will remain open for additional clarification.
Exactly. So everyone that submitted a comment via the web chat, we're going to document that as well. Any new questions or comments that come in, we're going to include that in and get responses back from AHAM, give them a chance to review them and look at it. You'll get a copy of the presentation. Again, everybody's got a link to the TSD. And then there will be a summary report that comes out of the webinar that sort of answers those questions, provides more insights into their, anyone who has any comments will also capture that as well.
Are there any other?
Okay, we are going to end now. We've finished the questions that have been submitted. So again, we appreciate very much your attention and your participation in this webinar. And I also thank AHAM for putting together an excellent presentation. As we mentioned, we will get this presentation out to you today, and then you'll have 1 week to submit additional questions, issues, and concerns to us, which we would then have AHAM respond to. Anyway, thank you very much for your time.